How are you? I'm glad to meet you. Today's topic is God's covenant for Abraham. The author is Abraham Park. The structure of the Book of Joshua. The Book of Joshua is divided largely into three parts according to the conquest period. Part 1. Joshua chapter 1 verse 1 to 12:24. Part 1 is a narrative about the completion of the 6-year period of preparation and conquest of the main regions from 1406 BC to 1400 BC. Part 2. Joshua chapter 13 verse 1 to 21:45. Part 2 is a narrative of the 10 years it took for the land to be distributed and for the 12 tribes to settle, from 1400 BC to 1390 BC. Part 3. Joshua chapter 22 verse 1 to 24:33. Part 3 is a narrative of the return of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Joshua's dying instructions regarding Israel's permanent settlement in Canaan. Joshua's death, at the age of 110, 1390 BC, and the burial of Joseph's bones in Shechem. The battles for the main regions of Canaan. About 6 years after the long 40-year wandering in the wilderness, the Israelites finally arrived in the land where they would be permanently settled. However, this land was not an uninhabited land. Not only were there indigenous people already well settled in the land, but also the land was a battleground for the surrounding nations struggling for power. Thus, the conquest and settlement took time. Joshua chapter 11 verse 18 states, Joshua waged war a long time with all these kings, and Joshua chapter 11 verse 23 and Joshua chapter 14 verse 15 state that the land had rest from war. These verses indicate that large battles for the conquest of the main regions had been continuous during the periods covered in Joshua chapter 6. They destroyed Jericho at the center, Joshua chapter 6, captured the city of Ai, Joshua chapter 8, defeated the united forces of the Amorites in the southern region, Joshua chapter 10 verse 1, and annihilated the regions of Makkedah, Libnah, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir, Joshua chapter 10 verse 28. Afterwards, Joshua led the victory against the allied forces of the northern regions at the waters of Merom, Joshua chapter 11 verse 1. Joshua and the Israelites conquered the main regions of Canaan over a period of 6 years and distributed the land among the 12 tribes, which were responsible for individually conquering and taking possession of their land. God could have commanded the Israelites to join forces to conquer the remaining unconquered land, but he commanded the distribution of the land even before all the regions were conquered. He did so in order to demonstrate that if they had faith that God's covenant would be fulfilled and trust in his sovereign power, each tribe could independently conquer and possess the land. The distribution of land and settlement. About 10 years. The Israelites, exhausted after the conquest of the main regions, were filled with fear regarding the rest of the land. Furthermore, tension was on the rise among the tribes because the relatively stronger tribes had taken possession of the central regions. The distribution process was delayed for these two reasons. Thus, Joshua rushed to initiate the construction of the Tent of Meeting in order to reconfirm God's covenant regarding the land of Canaan and to restore the people's faith. Joshua chapter 18 verse 1. After this, minor conquest battles for settlement continued for 10 years until Joshua died at the age of 110 in 1390 BC. Joshua chapter 24 verse 29. The distribution of the land of Canaan was part of the fulfillment process of God's covenant with Abraham. Although the nation of Israel faced the possibility of eradication before the Exodus and faced hardships and endless battles during the 40-year wilderness journey and the conquest mission, God gave the land of Canaan to the Israelites as their inheritance at last. In the land distribution process, God established borders on all 4 sides, and the land within those borders were allocated by drawing lots. There was no room for human interference. Everything progressed according to God's providence. The victory of the Israelites in the battles of conquest was completely the result of God's sovereign work. In his last word of encouragement to the people, Joshua proclaimed that it was God who led them to victory in their battles, and the Lord drove out from before us all the peoples, even the Amorites who lived in the land. Joshua chapter 24 verse 18. Victory and defeat in the battles we face in our lives are also completely in God's hands. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 47, Proverbs chapter 21 verse 31. Moreover, possession of the heavenly inheritance is also possible only through God's sovereign providence, not by human methods. The God who chose the smallest nation in the world, Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 6, and allowed them to enter Canaan will also give us possession of heaven by his sovereign providence. However, just as the Israelites faced countless battles before they had possession of Canaan, so too will we also have to struggle against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places, until we possess heaven. Ephesians chapter 6 verse 10. This is Abraham Park's sermon. Abraham Park was an acclaimed world-class theologian with remarkable pastoral spirituality. He had dedicated his entire life to prayer and the scriptures, having read the Bible over 1,800 times. Throughout his lifetime ministry, he was a true pastor who loved the church and the congregation like his own children. His daily schedule consisted of 2-hour prayers and 3-hour Bible readings, as well as continual preaching and evangelizing. With conviction that to die is to live, he did his best in his prayer life to God for 3 years, 6 months and 7 days in the deep mountains. When the sun set, he did nothing but pray. When the sun rose, he did nothing but read the Bible. Then, finally, a single ray of grace shone upon him. Throughout the powerful illumination of the Holy Spirit and by the grace of God, the scenes in the Bible unfolded like a panorama before his eyes. These scenes were written down on large arrowroot leaves which were bound with a twig. They were later transcribed onto paper bought from a village under the mountain every few months. This is how Abraham Park's sermons began. Many people are impressed by the Abraham Park as follows. How can a person love so many people? How can a person make such a big impact to so many people? He is so hard-working, never rest. He never ceased to pray. He deserves to be truly honored for his dedication for the church and the congregations. A true and faithful worker of God.